The Middle East stands at a dangerous crossroads as the long-simmering tensions between Iran and Israel have exploded into direct military confrontation. What began as decades of proxy warfare and covert operations has now escalated into open conflict, with both nations launching unprecedented attacks against each other's territories. The current crisis represents the most serious military escalation between these two regional powers since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and the consequences are reverberating across the entire Middle East and beyond. The immediate trigger for this escalation came on June 13, 2025, when Israel launched a unilateral military strike against Iran, targeting nuclear facilities, missile factories, senior military officials, and nuclear scientists. This bold and provocative attack marked a significant departure from Israel's traditional strategy of conducting covert operations and proxy warfare against Iranian interests. Instead of operating in the shadows, Israel chose to strike directly. At the heart of Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure, crossing red lines that had been respected for decades, Iran's foreign minister immediately declared the attack an act of war. And Iran retaliated by launching waves of drones and missiles toward Israeli territory. This response demonstrated Iran's commitment to not backing down in the face of Israeli aggression, setting the stage for what many analysts now describe as a full-scale regional conflict. The Iranian leadership, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, made it clear that they would not allow such attacks to go unanswered. Regardless of the international consequences, the roots of this conflict stretch back decades, but the current escalation can be traced to the aftermath of the October 7, 2023, Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent Gaza war. Throughout 2024, tensions between Iran and Israel continued to build as Israel expanded its military operations beyond Gaza to target Iranian proxies and assets across the region. The conflict gradually transformed from a localized war in Gaza into a broader regional confrontation involving Iran's network of allied militias and proxy forces across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The tit-for-tat escalation continued through mid and late 2024, with Israeli strikes killing high-profile figures, including Hamas leaders Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar. Each assassination and targeted killing raised the stakes higher, with Iran viewing these operations as direct attacks on its strategic interests and regional influence. The Islamic Republic had invested billions of dollars and decades of effort in building what it calls the Axis of Resistance, a network of allied groups designed to pressure Israel and counter American influence in the region. The current military confrontation has already resulted in significant casualties and destruction on both sides. At least 224 people have been killed since Israel began bombing Iran, while Iranian retaliatory strikes have killed at least 24 people in Israel. These numbers represent just the beginning of what could become a much larger humanitarian crisis if the conflict continues to escalate. Beyond the immediate casualties, both countries are experiencing extensive property damage and economic disruption as their populations struggle to cope with the reality of direct warfare. Israeli airstrikes have wiped out much of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's inner circle, dealing a severe blow to Iran's leadership structure and decision-making capabilities. This targeting of senior Iranian officials represents a significant escalation in Israel's strategy. Moving beyond military targets to include political and religious leadership, the death of key figures close to Khamenei has not only weakened Iran's command structure, but also personalized the conflict for the Iranian leadership, making diplomatic resolution even more challenging. The scope and intensity of the current fighting have shocked international observers and regional allies alike. Israel has warned hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate the middle of Iran's capital as Israel's air campaign on Tehran appeared to broaden on the fourth day of an intensifying conflict. This unprecedented move to target Iran's capital city directly demonstrates the extent to which both sides have abandoned previous restraints and are now willing to strike at the heart of each other's political and economic centers. Israel struck Iran's state-run television station during a live broadcast, forcing a reporter to run off camera following an explosion. This attack on media infrastructure represents another escalation in the conflict. As Israel targets Iran's ability to communicate with its population and the international community, the symbolic impact of striking a television station during a live broadcast sends a clear message about Israel's determination to disrupt Iranian operations at every level. The missile exchanges between the two countries have been particularly intense and revealing. Experts say Iran has fired about 700 of its medium-range ballistic missiles, leaving it with anything between 300 to 1,300 left in its stockpile. This rapid depletion of Iran's missile arsenal raises critical questions about the sustainability of the Iranian war effort and the strategic calculations being made by both sides. Iran's willingness to expend such a significant portion of its ballistic missile inventory suggests that the literate leadership views this conflict as an existential threat requiring maximum military response. The international community has watched with growing alarm as the conflict has expanded beyond the borders of Iran and Israel. Retaliatory attacks are likely to be launched by multiple members of the Axis of Resistance, including in Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, as similarly done in the coordinated attack on Israel in April 2024. This multi-front approach to the conflict threatens to engulf the entire Middle East in warfare. As Iran's proxy forces across the region prepare to join the fight against Israel, the role of the United States in this conflict has become increasingly complex and controversial. Iran's supreme leader rejected U.S. calls for surrender in the face of more Israeli strikes and warned that any military involvement by the Americans would cause irreparable damage to them. This warning from Khamenei highlights the dangerous potential for the conflict to draw on major powers and transform a regional war into a global confrontation. Iran's Khamenei warns U.S. of irreparable consequences if it launches strikes as Trump claims Iran is defenseless. The war of words between Iranian leadership and the incoming Trump administration has added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Trump's characterization of Iran as defenseless appears to be an attempt to pressure the Iranian leadership into backing down, but it has also raised the stakes for Iran's response, as no leadership can afford to appear weak in the face of such public challenges. The domestic political implications of this conflict are significant. For both countries, in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu faces the challenge of managing a multi-front war while dealing with ongoing domestic political pressures and the demands of governing a country under attack. The Israeli public, already traumatized by the October 7th attacks and the prolonged Gaza conflict, now faces the reality of direct Iranian missile strikes on their territory. In Iran, the leadership must balance the demands of responding to Israeli attacks with the economic and social pressures facing the country after years of international sanctions. The Iranian population, already struggling with economic hardship and political repression, now faces the additional burden of a war that threatens to drain the country's resources and potentially invite even more severe international isolation. The impact of this conflict extends far beyond the immediate participants. Pakistan, which shares a 905-kilometer border with Iran, has expressed alarm about the conflict and its potential impact on Pakistani security. Regional powers are increasingly concerned about the spillover effects of the Iran-Israel war, including the potential for refugee flows, economic disruption, and the involvement of proxy forces operating across multiple borders. The United Nations Security Council has been forced to respond to the escalating crisis. The United Nations Security Council will convene an emergency session at the request of Iran and its allies to discuss Israel's military operation against the Islamic Republic. However, given the deep divisions among the permanent members of the Security Council regarding Middle East policy, meaningful international intervention appears unlikely in the near term. The nuclear dimension of this conflict adds a particularly dangerous element to the current crisis. Israel's targeting of Iranian nuclear facilities represents a red line that Iran has long warned would trigger massive retaliation. The international community has expressed concern that the conflict could lead to Iranian withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or acceleration of any potential weapons program. The destruction of nuclear facilities also raises environmental and safety concerns that could affect civilian populations across the region. The economic implications of this conflict are already being felt globally. Oil prices have spiked as markets worry about potential disruption to Middle Eastern energy supplies. Both Iran and Israel play important roles in regional energy infrastructure, and the conflict threatens key shipping routes and production facilities. The global economy, already dealing with various challenges, faces the prospect of another major disruption to energy markets. The conflict has also exposed divisions within various political coalitions and international alliances. The key right-wing figures, including some Trump allies, question the Israeli strikes and warn against a U.S. war with Iran. This division within traditionally pro-Israel American political circles demonstrates the complexity of the current situation and the challenges facing policymakers. Trying to navigate between supporting allies and avoiding broader conflict, the humanitarian crisis resulting from this conflict continues to worsen as both sides show little sign of backing down. Civilian populations in both countries are bearing the brunt of the military operations, with hospitals, schools, and residential areas coming under attack. International humanitarian organizations are struggling to provide aid and assistance in an increasingly dangerous and unstable environment. Looking ahead, the prospects for de-escalation appear limited in the immediate term. Both Iran and Israel have invested too much politically and militarily in this confrontation to back down easily. The leadership on both sides faces domestic pressures that make compromise difficult. While the international community lacks the leverage and unity necessary to impose a ceasefire, the regional implications of this conflict likely persist long after any eventual ceasefire. The destruction of infrastructure, the displacement of populations, and the deepening of sectarian and political divisions will create long-term challenges for stability throughout the Middle East. The conflict has also accelerated arms races and military preparations by other regional powers who fear being drawn into future confrontations. As this conflict continues to unfold, it represents a critical test for international diplomacy and conflict resolution mechanisms. The failure to prevent or quickly resolve this crisis could have implications for other potential conflicts around the world. As countries observe how the international community responds to direct military confrontation between regional powers, the Iran-Israel conflict of 2025 may prove to be a turning point in Middle Eastern geopolitics, marking the end of an era of proxy warfare and the beginning of a new period of direct military confrontation between regional powers. The ultimate outcome of this crisis will likely reshape the balance of power in the Middle East for years to come, with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate participants to affect global security, economics, and international relations. World watches with growing concern as two of the Middle East's most powerful military forces engage in direct combat, knowing that the stakes extend far beyond the immediate battlefield to encompass the stability of the entire international system.